second part of our special episode, our special two-part episode entitled, Yes, We Can Have Kids Too. And that is taking a look at raising children and even being pregnant while you have a disability. Now, the reason that this part of the topic specifically is a little bit close to my heart right now is everybody on our cast knows, but what our listeners and our viewers don't know is that I am actually pregnant right now. And it's not easy. I'm just going to start with that. It's not easy. At this point, I haven't actually gotten any confirmation that the baby's okay because it's still pretty early on. I'm only 12 weeks and I'm going to learn in a couple days. By the time you see this, hopefully, fingers crossed, everything is okay because it'll be several weeks from now. But it's been hard. It has definitely been hard. It has not been easy. I mean, I'm dealing with pregnancy with a heart condition, stomach issues, pelvic pain that is chronic and is actually bothering me right at this very moment. So I'm sitting on a lot of ice right now. I gotta say that is helping. It's not been easy. But the thing that's interesting is that the reason that I came to this decision to actually get pregnant myself is kind of a weird and wacky way. And I had no intentions of ever being pregnant. Not so much because I have so many disabilities. It was just like, oh my God, pregnancy will be so difficult, which I am learning now. It is. Boy, is it difficult. But it was more to the effect of I also have severe anxiety. And one of my severe anxieties is a fear of throwing up. And of course, with pregnancy, a lot of people throw up and a lot of people get really nauseous. And unfortunately, I have been really nauseous all the way through so far. And it is not easy. And I do have a diagnosed stomach issue as well. So that makes it hard. But originally, I was pretty much going to go the same route as Cynthia. As Cynthia mentioned in our last episode, Cynthia has a little boy who's almost 2 years old, and he was born from an embryo donor via surrogate. So she had a really, really great ending, good surrogate, everything went well. And unfortunately, we kind of went the same route. We had an egg donor, not an embryo donor, but we had an egg donor and a surrogate. And unfortunately, everything fell apart. So we talked about it and we decided that we were going to try and see if I could do this. And we got everything cleared with my doctors first, so we knew what we were getting into. They said that with my heart condition, I probably have a good chance of success and that probably I won't have any complications. They can't guarantee, but they think I'm going to be okay. And then it happened faster than I thought it would. So I did not anticipate that we would conceive so quickly. We did. And I went into a panic the first couple months, total panic. I'm only 3 months now, so basically the panic hasn't ended yet. Because it is scary when you have to deal with things and then, you have a fear of vomiting on top of that. And you're feeling like you're going to throw up all day. It's not easy. And that's not to mention the heart condition, the fact that I'm more tired, the fact that it's harder to climb a flight of stairs, even though I'm only 12 weeks pregnant. And so the interesting thing is for people who, for example, have diabetes or have a heart condition or have any other condition that doesn't necessarily affect their fertility, but will affect their ability to carry physically because it's too stressful or it's too hard or could put them at risk, they are diagnosed with infertility. And this is something I found out because I was diagnosed with infertility, which clearly was wrong because I'm not infertile. And so I don't think this is fair. And I don't think it's fair to people who are, especially to people who are dealing with infertility. And so, I mean, I don't know if any of you have heard the same thing. And I know, like Shaini, we're going to hear from you a little bit later because you actually deal with both a disability and infertility, which is also something that can happen. But just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're infertile.
And just a note about surrogacy in Canada, you can't pay a surrogate, but you do have to reimburse them for the cost of meds and anything that is not covered by their provincial health insurance, plus travel, and a few other things. Yeah,
and also like sometimes you have to pay their internet bills or you have to pay their groceries if they have to eat something specific because they're pregnant. You have to pay for that. Although they have made the rules a little bit more tougher now because people were getting away with stuff like,
my phone bill.
Sorry?
My phone bill.
Yeah, a little phone bill, and also like
yeah,
it's like some women could, some women could potentially take advantage of the system. And so, and I get it because you're carrying a baby and there's not much in it for you except the feeling of gratitude. So I get why, you might want to say, well, I want to splurge on this outfit. Can you buy me this outfit? okay, fine, I get it. But at the same time, we do have to protect ourselves. So even though technically you're not legally allowed to pay a surrogate in Canada, it'll still cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. Imagine what it costs in the States where you are allowed to pay a surrogate. Journeys there are up to $200,000 because you actually pay the surrogate a fee for
It's a
carrying.
house. In some places, it's a house. Not in Toronto, but it's a house in some places.
So maybe in Prince Edward County somewhere in Ontario. But anyway,
where I live, houses can be that much.
Good. That's amazing.
but yeah, the whole thing about being infertile, just because you either can't get pregnant because, like, for example, you're Cynthia and your doctor has said you shouldn't be passing on your genetic condition, or because you choose not to get pregnant, shouldn't yield a diagnosis of infertility. And when I heard, and not only that, I got a diagnosis of primary infertility, which was like, well, that's even making it more specific. And it was because it wasn't my second child, it was my first. And I'm like, my husband's not infertile. I'm not infertile. We're just choosing to go a different route because we know it's dangerous for me. At the time, I thought it was more dangerous than it actually is. But just all that, it's like, why are you giving us a diagnosis of infertility if that's not our issue? You know?
Just a note, I was never officially diagnosed as infertile.
Okay, so I think your doctor, it would have been a little different, maybe back then. When we went to our fertility clinic, I was told that, okay, well, you're infertile. And I'm like, but this isn't a fertility issue. And they're like, doesn't matter, you're still diagnosed with infertility.
Yeah. My neurologist actually said, oh, if you want to get pregnant, you're considered very high risk. That's all he said to me at that time.
Which is, you know what? That's what people should be saying. So I don't know. And if anybody out there is watching and they've had a similar experience, and for example, you do have diabetes or a heart condition and you've been told it's not, or epilepsy, and you've been told it's not a smart idea to get pregnant or it's not the best for you, have you been diagnosed with infertility? Because I'd really like to hear from other people about that. Because for me, it's just been weird. And, you know, I brought it up with some of my friends who's been dealing with infertility, and they feel like, well, that's not fair because we're dealing with infertility. You're not. And I'm like, I know. So actually, Shaini, so that's actually a good time to kind of talk about where you're coming from, because you're being amazingly proactive and trying to work on your fertility now, years ahead of when, you know, you might have a child, which is amazing. So let's kind of hear from your story.
Okay, so as everyone knows, I have RP, which is a genetic eye disorder. Got diagnosed with that when I was 21. When I was 25, I noticed that my body was not the same, was not getting my periods the same. I was getting acne like I was 14 again, mood swings, just my body was off. So went back and forth. I got diagnosed with Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. So it's basically a hormonal, it's kind of like an autoimmune disease also, just your body just kind of shifts, your hormones shift and your body just doesn't work the same way anymore. So at that point, I was still ovulating. My body was still acting like a quote unquote regular 25-year-old. I just wasn't getting my period properly and I just was gaining weight. Fast forward to maybe like when I was like 27, 28, it got to the point where I would be at the office and I would be sweating, and the AC's on in the summer and I would be sweating. I would literally go like 8-9 months without my period. The longest I've gone without having my period is probably like a year and a half. And I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with like horrible pelvic pain, like something popped in my ovaries or down there. I would just wake up. So I needed to figure out what was going on. And I noticed a decrease in my vision. So that was what was more alarming to me because I already knew I was losing vision. I just didn't know why I was losing so much vision all of a sudden in one eye. So we went back and forth and I did a bunch of tests and it turned out that I was going into menopause and my body was no longer ovulating. So this is one of the rare cases of having PCOS. So when you get diagnosed with PCOS, you are told that you could possibly have trouble getting pregnant or keeping your pregnancy because you're still ovulating for the most part. But in my case, it got to the point where my body my hormones completely shifted. And the doctor said, well, if you want the symptoms to go away, like to just kind of be hidden, you can go on birth control. But for me, I didn't want them just to be hidden because when it came to the point of me wanting to have kids, I would be back to where I was and not fixing the problem. And then he told me that if I wanted to get pregnant, I would have to go on Clomide, which is like a hormonal therapy to get your body to ovulate. So it's just basically injections and everything, and then they retrieve the embryo and everything, and you have to go and put it back in. So it's kind of like IVF, but like the cheapest one to begin with. So I was single at that point. I'm single right now. So obviously at that point in my life, I wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm trying to have a baby right now, get me on Clomide. So I was fortunate enough to be like, okay, like I need to fix this, because I don't want to get, at 28, I was like, oh, I don't want to like be married at 30 and then be like, oh shit, I can't get pregnant. I wanted to fix it. I wanted, and also like my weight was off, my sugar levels were off, and like being someone who's losing their vision, I didn't want my sugar level to be so high because that could affect your vision. I just had a lot of things that I needed to fix. So I decided to find a natural way of figuring things out. And so that's been my journey for the last 2 years. And as of January, I started ovulating again. So my body is naturally ovulating. I was getting my period properly on a 30-day cycle. I don't have hot flashes anymore. I'm no longer in menopause. But it's still a journey. Like with all this COVID stuff, like I kind of wasn't ovulating for 2.5 months, but that's because of the stress and like my routine changed. I wasn't as active as before. I kind of ate dairy when I shouldn't be. So like I knew what caused it. So now I just went back to my regular life. But also in March, I had found out that I have a hole in my right eye, because one of the other symptoms is I have cysts in my ovaries and in my breast because of my PCOS, and one got in my eye and pulled on my macula, and now I have a hole in my eye. So I don't have vision in my right eye because of one of the symptoms of PCOS. So I'm currently waiting for surgery for that. So it's a whole thing of my body and everything being like connected. And what I've learned is that I was fortunate enough to be able to take that proactive thing of being able to try to fix it. And like doctors still don't know 100% sure that if I do try to have a kid today, that I will get pregnant, but at least I'm ovulating, so I don't have to go on Clomide like they told me I would have to. I just have to be more careful and just hope for the best. But like, I think for me, it's just to help tell people like not to give up, because it's easy to give up because of what we hear in society, what we hear in the news, or like on social media and everything. It's just easy to kind of give up. And I think it's just for people to realize that our body is like one of the craziest, most magical things in the world for what it does. It still amazes me. And I think it's our job to kind of like listen to it and kind of just nourish it with what it needs to be able to create a human being, because our bodies can do that, which is crazy.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It is really weird. There is something to be said that you suddenly feel like there's an alien inside you when there's a baby. It's like, oh, this is weird. Even though probably my baby is currently probably about this big, but it's just like, oh my God, there's like a little thing inside me that's probably punching me. So it is incredible what your body can do. And I think it's even more incredible when you have a disability and you realize that, oh, I'm still capable of doing this amazing thing. But it's not easy. And the fact is, and this is what I've found, is so far, I haven't found much in the way of any reliable information on pregnancy and disability online. And so every time I go do a search, because I'm really curious to see what there is out there, the only thing I'll come up with are some blogs from people who have had a child and like have been pregnant and had a disability. And it's mostly just from people who have a visible physical disability, as in they're like paraplegic, in a wheelchair, and that kind of thing. So you're not going to see a lot of stuff about people with, blindness or a heart condition or epilepsy or something like that, or diabetes, because it's just, I don't think a lot of people are talking about it. And I don't know if the demand is there. So if you go to a regular pregnancy website, like whattoexpect.com, you're not going to find anything about it. Nothing. Or the bump.com or anything like that. It's like, it's a whole segment of society that doesn't exist and is still getting pregnant.
The foundations have some information, but it's not necessarily as detailed as you want it to be.
Yeah, and then of course, if you kind of like try to get into medical research papers, you'll find stuff. But I don't want to be reading a research paper written for a PhD audience. Like, that's not for me. I don't necessarily need to be reading like the fluff from whattoexpect.com, not to knock them, because they're a pretty reliable resource. but it's also written with the expectation that, and this was funny when I was going through the site originally, when we just started talking about being pregnant, and I'm reading all this stuff, and it's like, for most women, this is the most they'll ever have been poked and prodded in their life, and the first time they'll ever be in a hospital. And I'm just laughing. I'm like, you don't even know. You don't even know. Like, this is going to be nothing for me after what I've been through. This is nothing. You're not sticking tubes in my chest. You're not pulling tubes out of my chest. That's fine. So, I mean, I don't know what the rest of you kind of feel about, this kind of thing and about pregnancy, because I mean, it is obviously going to be harder for some people with invisible disabilities than others, but I just, kind of, what are your thoughts?
My neurologist kept on telling me that, this isn't the guy who told me never to have kids. This is like my former neurologist. He kept on saying that I have to be very, very careful. And like, he even asked me like if I was on the pill and whether, like, what we're doing for birth control. And I thought that was kind of not really much of his business. I mean, so, but he was like, well, what's going to happen if you have an accident?
Oh, well, like
you're pregnant.
They automatically think that women are just going to have accidents. That's like the other thing. It's like always, oh, you're a woman, so you're going to have an accident. Like,
yeah. So like, what if that accident happens? I mean, it's really because the guy, something happened or whatnot. He has a role as well. And but
it's always our responsibility.
Yeah. So and I was like, because I think he said that if I wanted, he was basically implying that if I wanted to carry myself, it would have to be through IVF, which makes sense. But so he asked me what would happen if you have an accident, and then I said, like, well, we'll make a decision when we get testing done, and when we, and then he was like, well, once you hear the heartbeat, you're probably going to want to. I don't know. He was just asking and making all these weird comments, and that made me really, really uncomfortable.
So yeah, I think people just do that sometimes, and they don't really think about what they're saying. And I think also something that I've noticed living life with a disability is that a lot of doctors lack bedside manners. I won't go into that because that's a whole other episode. But a lot of times doctors just don't know what to say, because if they haven't experienced it themselves, they have no idea. But sorry, Sarah, I was asking you about like kind of what your thoughts are, and I don't know if you want to share them. You don't have to, because you're also the newbie here, so you can get away with not sharing. The newbie.
Yeah, no, sure. So actually, I've been thinking of just looking into just making sure everything is, I guess, okay with me, because I think in my late teens, early 20s, I'm struggling with like just hormonal changes and a lot of irregular periods, or not getting it and then getting it, and I don't get my period for very long, which I'm just told by just like my cousins or family in general, like, oh, you only get it for 2.5, 3 days, like that's not normal and whatnot. And a few times when I have gone to my family doctor in the past, she's like, well, best thing is going on birth control, because I get severe pain when I'm on my period. So I actually have to take prescribed medication. And so she's like, if you take birth control, this should kind of solve everything. But I feel like I don't want to be on birth control, just because there are like some side effects and things like that as well.
Severe PMS. It can happen. Severe PMS. It can happen.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, it is like, and I have a close friend, and she's like, no, like, we talk, and she's like, I think you should get, like, since you are planning to have children in the next couple of years, you should kind of get a head start of it and kind of figure out, if there is something going on that you can start working on fixing or changing your diet or whatever it is, versus when I'm actually I'm trying to have children, then it's like a whole different ball game, right? Because if you're not able to conceive or whatnot, and then finding out. And I know a lot of people actually now in my friend circle, in my network, that are trying to get pregnant, and and going every couple of weeks and getting checkups and figuring out why they're not able to get pregnant, and just listening to their story and the process and things that they have to go through. It kind of makes me like think a bit more about how I want to go about it, I guess. That makes sense.
For a lot of people who are considered high risk and they also have fertility issues, there's a lot of clinics that will shut the door on you. And that's the problem, is that if you have a health issue where, for example, if you're doing an IVF, an egg retrieval, and you have issues with sedation, they don't want you to have it done in an off-site clinic from a hospital. So for me, originally, the plan 5 years ago was I was actually going to use my own eggs and then make embryos with my husband's sperm, and then we would have had a surrogate from there rather than use an egg donor. And the problem was getting into a hospital, not getting into a hospital, going to a clinic that nobody would actually want to take a risk of doing an egg retrieval procedure on me, because that involves sedation and that could cause my heart to go into trouble. And nobody had the equipment off site to be able to support me if I went into heart failure or something like that. So we had, our options were limited, and it was a clinic in London, London, Ontario, but still, 2 hours away is a bit of a distance to go every day for cycle monitoring, or every other day. And then there was a high risk clinic opening at Mount Sinai Fertility, which is connected to the hospital, and it's only like a block away. So if something happened, they could rush me into like an emergency procedure or something. But the waiting list for high risk IVF was, I was on the list a year and a half. Like, it was going to take a year and a half for me to get to the top of the list. And not only that, but they had actually told me at the time that they said that if the Ontario government stops funding in certain areas of fertility, we might not get anything at all. So they told me not to expect anything. And at that point I was like, well, forget that. Let's just have an egg donor and go that way, because what's the point of waiting for this or commuting? Like, it's going to be hard enough on me as it is. I don't want to commute 2 hours every day for cycle monitoring. So, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't know, is that even if you want to use your own eggs, but you have a health condition and you want to have the help of a surrogate, is that you're not necessarily going to find a fertility clinic that will accept you. And there are a few. They're not necessarily the ones you want to go to, though. So
yeah. And I think also for me, it's like, I was always like, even when I was younger, I always say, oh, I want to adopt. I always wanted to adopt a child, and everyone would always tell me, like, don't you want to have your own child that looks like you and your husband? And I'm like, yeah, but I would want to adopt. And I still feel the same way. Yeah, I do want to have my own child, but I guess I'm more scared of like going through the full physical process of it, and the whole changing of my body.
And that's totally
and, like,
legit.
How all cultures to that, like, not about the whole adoption thing, that it is not considered a preference.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is more, it is preferred that your kids, quote unquote, look like you or are genetically related to you. So
exactly. And I mean, I asked my mom, I'm like, so Mom, what? And then she's like, well, if you want to, sure. But she's like, I would want you to have your own child and, experience that. But I'm like, maybe this could be another time. But I did struggle as a youth, and now, like, with body image and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that is also kind of like my biggest fear, is like, okay, if I go to get pregnant, I'm going to become like this huge person, and I'm just terrified of that. And just the thought of that, yes. And I love children, I love babies, but physically having to go through that process is very terrifying for me.
Oh, I believe me, I'm feeling all that right now. So I'm terrified because I'm seeing my weight go up, and I'm seeing my face. I'm seeing my face from like the last time we recorded, and looking at my face in the Zoom mirror or whatever it is in the Zoom camera, and going, I have more weight on my face than I did a month ago when we recorded our last episode. That's not cool. I'm like,
the own child thing is actually an insult to people who don't have kids who are genetically related to, like, adoptees.
Because just because it's not your own kid doesn't mean. And for some people,
love them the same way.
And for some people, it is a thing, but that's your own personal preference. So if you want your own biological child, that's absolutely fine, but it shouldn't be somebody else telling you to have your biological child.